Rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before proceeding with the meeting, we're going to make a slight change here for this meeting. In order that the vice chair can have some experience at actually running meetings, we have decided that tonight Jay will be leading the discussions for the applications and the items on the agenda. So at this point, I will turn the microphone over to Jay to lead the meeting.
All right, I'm on. At this point, I'd like to call the meeting to order. The first item on the agenda of substance is additions and deletions to the agenda. Anybody have any additions, deletions? Okay, hearing none. We'll move on to the approval of the minutes of our last meeting, regular meeting on September 19th. Anybody have any comments, changes, additions? If not, I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes as they
I
stand.
move to approve the minutes of September 19th.
Support.
I have a motion from Ann and support from John. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you. Next, we come to public comment. Anybody have any comments from the audience that are not on the agenda? Seeing none, we will move on to item number 6 on our agenda, which is the lot split reconfiguration number 378.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
If I might first,
Yes, you may.
I need to talk a little bit about something here first. If you looked at the information in detail, you saw that, and one of the pieces of information in there, specifically the conservation easement for Rosemary Blozen, you saw my signature as the witness to that transaction.
Yes, sir.
At that point in time, back in 1990, I don't remember the date, but in any case, I was the vice president of the Grocio Nature and Land Conservancy. As it turns out, this particular conservation easement was really put into the package by mistake. Okay, it is not relevant to the discussions we're having tonight. And I was not part of the conservation easement for Rayfield, which is the property that actually is in question. So I would ask the Commission whether anyone feels that that's a conflict of interest.
Any questions or concerns on that matter? Hearing none, we will pass on any action there, and you're free to participate in full.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I may as well, I just wanted to disclose that I'm friends with both the Chrysler family and the Brinkart family, and I just want to make sure that's not a conflict of interest as well.
Any concerns or questions from the Commission on that matter?
Nope.
Everybody's got friends.
That's right. Hearing none, we'll move on, and Jim, you can participate in the discussion and voting in full. A quick note of background on lot split reconfiguration number 378. We have, officially we have 4 applicants. We have Jerry Bringard and Adam Chrysler, and Tammy and Bruce Ranker. Hopefully I'm saying that correctly. The location of the properties in question here are lots 44C1A, 44B2A, and 44B1. Common description of these being the undeveloped property, the east side of Park Lane, approximately 350 feet south of the intersection of Park Lane and Horse Mill. To put it a little more commonly, that would be essentially just south and east of the Presbyterian Church on Park Lane. The proposal here is to reconfigure 3 adjacent lots to create 2 building sites along Park Lane. One of the 3 lots is currently occupied with a house at 20082 East River. The back portion of that lot is being separated and joined with the parcel to the south, and the back portion of that property and the one adjacent to it on the south is deed restricted with a conservation easement will not be used for home construction in the proposal. It will, however, be used to provide road frontage to enable the most southern buildable lot to be divided for the two home sites. I would expect that nobody who hasn't studied these drawings would be able to make any sense of that, so hopefully when Brian gets up, he will make some sense of that for us all. This is in the R1E, single-family residential zoning district, and all ordinances pertaining to that district would apply. Specifically, Article 3, single-family residential, and those standards that apply to R1E, and Article 19, general provisions, specifically 19.21 on lot splits. The process that we're going to follow here is multi-step, involves Planning Commission review and recommendation, and then Township Board approval. This is step one, and the Planning Commission may or may not vote tonight on this proposal at the discretion of the Commission. What we're going to do here to give us some background is Brian is going to give us a presentation on this matter. The Planning Commission will then be able to ask questions of Brian. The applicant will then be asked to come forward and address maybe some of the questions and generally give an overview of the proposal. And we'll seek audience comment, and then it'll come back to the Planning Commission. And at that point, we will determine whether we will move forward with this in one form or another this evening. So with no further ado, Brian, could you come up and help us out?
I'm going to work from the podium tonight. I've put a little slideshow together for us, so hopefully we can shed some light on exactly the specifics of the request. I will tell you, Mr. Chair, you've knocked out about half my presentation with that summary. So.
I apologize.
No, I'm teasing. I'm teasing. Some of this is redundant now, but I'll go through it anyway. We are here for a simultaneous split and combination, which we often refer to as a reconfiguration. It does take into account 3 separate residential parcels, one of which has a home on it, as already noted, 2 of which are currently vacant. You see the lot numbers that we're dealing with, all within the same sub. The site zoning is actually, it's R1A and R1B currently. The East River frontage is R1A, Park Lane frontage is R1B. Because the request entails the creation of a new buildable lot, the standards of the R1E overlay kick in. So for our Park Lane side, we're dealing with the requirements of R1E, which are a little bit greater than what our R1B or R1A even requirements would be from a dimensional standpoint. 19.21 is our appropriate ordinance section. And as already noted, procedurally, if you take action this evening, it would be in the form of a recommendation. The Township Board has the final say on all lot splits and combinations. This is not the greatest map in the world, but wanted to try to give you a feel exactly for what we were talking about. As the chairman noted, we are south of Horse Mill, east side of Park Lane. Lot 44B1 is this, if you can follow my arrow, is this large through lot, which has frontage on both East River to the right side, Park Lane to the left side. Parcel or lot 44B2A is this piece immediately south of that, and then this larger parcel here, 44C1A, is just south of that. Again, the real focus of this being the Park Lane frontage, and I'll show you a couple more maps as we go through this. Please let me know if you want me to reference back to the existing plat map, just at any point if we need to see it again. This is just a reproduction of the table that's in your review letter. What I've done is just described the 3 resulting parcels from this request. We have parcels A, B, and C as shown on the submittal. Parcel A is a vacant parcel, fronts Park Lane, and it would be comprised of the south 125 feet of lot 44C1A. It is approximately 1.4 acres in area. Parcel B, then, is just north of Parcel A. This is the other vacant new buildable lot as a result of the request. This would incorporate multiple pieces of property. So the west 300 feet of 44B1, and then all of 44B2A, and the north 75 feet of 44C1A. In total, this parcel would be comprised of 225 feet of lot width, street frontage, and approximately 1.8 acres of lot area. Parcel B is the parcel that was referenced earlier that is also subject to the conservation easement held by the Land and Nature Conservancy. The north 150 feet of that 225-foot parcel is covered by that easement. And then the last parcel, which is identified as parcel C, is simply the remainder of that already developed parcel. I'm going to go back to show you, again, the through lot that I referenced earlier. The home sits on the East River side in this general vicinity, and so parcel C would actually be the remainder of that lot after the split. Here's a little bit better view. As I mentioned earlier, parcel A, I'm going to work from north to south here. Parcel A, this is the south 125 feet of this existing lot. So currently, this is one lot. A split is proposed in this particular area. The other split then is proposed for this large through lot, where this parcel would get split in this particular location, and then the combination entails the west 300 feet of this lot, as well as this lot just south, and then the remaining portion of the southerly lot. So these are essentially 1, 2, and then 3 as reference. Currently vacant, developed with the residents.
Can you show with your cursor again where that conservation easement is?
Absolutely. Yeah, it doesn't show too well. You can just see it shown here. It is this north 150 feet of parcel B. So everything from here, it's basically these two rectangles, if that makes sense. So this piece and this piece, those are each 75-foot width pieces. So this in total is 150 foot. Keep clicking that. Sorry, guys. 150 foot that entails that conservation easement. There is another piece of that conservation easement, which is a parcel north of our subject site. So if you look at the easement language or the easement document, the easement actually also takes into account a piece that's up here, which is why you'll see, if you see the shape of it, you can see the two southerly rectangles of same shape and size, 75 feet wide by 300 feet deep.
And Brian, if you wouldn't mind, this makes a little bit more sense to us than maybe somebody else who isn't used to seeing this, because we've got a convention that we apply with the blue and the red. Could you kind of explain how somebody reading this could interpret that?
Yeah, of course. The blue is intended to show the existing parcels, and then the red is how they're proposed. So it gets a little funky in here, but you can follow my mouse again. The blue line all the way around, it's killing me. This southerly parcel, that is one lot. The blue line around this smaller parcel, this is the second lot, and then the blue line, which is this larger through lot here, which goes all the way from East River to Park Lane. So those are those existing lots. As reflected, kind of put your mind's eye on this sheet, and I'm going to go back to this one. So here's the through lot, here's the smaller vacant piece, and then here's the larger vacant piece. So there's a split here, and there's a split here, and then a recombination across here. And this is just another version of the same thing. It doesn't really show as well, but I wanted you to at least see an aerial photo so you knew what was in the area, what it looked like. This is the residence on that through lot. You can see right here. So this is proposed parcel C, would be right in this area. Proposed parcel B then incorporates this heavily wooded area, and then a bit further south, and then parcel C, again, is in this area also. Vacant and heavily wooded at this time. And I believe there is actually an existing driveway. If you had a chance to drive by the area, I believe there's an existing driveway to what is proposed as parcel C. So with that, I just want to do a quick overview of our review standards. These are all from Section 19.21, which was referenced earlier. These are really applied to make sure that ultimately we're going to create a parcel, or if we're creating a new parcel, that we are not creating something that is out of compliance with our ordinance, that we're not creating something that is going to likely warrant variances in the future, or likely need variances in the future, and avoid a situation where we're creating something that is essentially unbuildable. That's really what the test is here. We want to make sure that we're going to have functioning properties as a result of this. One thing that I did not include in the presentation, but I will note because it is an important consideration, and that is anytime we're dealing with a split, we have to first look at the Land Division Act, so we've got to go to statute even before we go to our own local regs. It's not in my presentation, but there is a paragraph in my review letter. We did apply the standards of the State Land Division Act, and this request is permissible under the Act. What it is there are, and this is going to be a really generic summary, but what the Act says is that there are limitations on how many times you can split a platted lot based upon its size. So if you have a larger acreage parcel, you can have a certain number of splits. What it also says is that every 10 years or so, these number of splits apply to what is defined as a parent parcel. So what's happened in this case is you may look at that plat map. I'm going to go back to this real quickly. And you'll note that Lot 44, in and of itself, in this subdivision, has been split numerous times. Portions of Lot 44, you can see, go as far south as my cursor here and all the way up to this area here. So Lot 44 has been split many, many times. The original plat is very old, though, and these splits all have occurred over time. So what we found through our research, both materials submitted by the applicant as well as working with the assessor's office, is that the last split of any parcel within Lot 44 actually occurred in 1977. So it's been some 23, 24 years since, is my math right? No, 33, 34 years. Don't let me do math on the spot, guys, you know better. Since any splits have occurred of that property. Therefore, we've not had any issues with parent parcels being split in many years, which is why this split is now allowable under the Act. I hope that makes sense, but I'd be happy to handle any questions. So back to our local standards. Just a quick summary. Lot area is the first requirement. Obviously, we've got to provide the minimum lot area for the district. Because we are dealing with a situation where the R1E overlay kicks in, that is a 30,000 square foot district. The R1A, which would still apply to the existing home on East River, is also a 30,000 square foot district. All three of our lots are actually over an acre, so we're safe on all accounts there. If you look at the survey sheet drawing, you'll notice that building envelopes are drawn in. We also want to make sure that there's sufficient buildable area if somebody's going to go through this process. You'll note that the two vacant parcels both have sizable building envelopes. It does not show all that well in this map, but or at least on the screen, but this dashed line essentially in here. And you can see that for parcel B, the building envelope has taken into consideration this conservation easement. If there were no conservation easement here, the building envelope would essentially run up into this northerly 150 feet of that lot. However, it stops short because of that conservation easement, which protects or prohibits residential construction on that portion of the property. Oop, too far. Buildable area, similar to building envelope. There's both of those resulting parcels on A and B, which are the two vacant ones. Plenty of room to build a conforming house to current standards. Minimum frontage. This is a little bit different than lot width. Your frontage standard is a street frontage requirement. You have a minimum 60-foot street frontage requirement. This was written into the ordinance several years ago as a way to sort of limit or reduce the number of flag-shaped lots that we get and/or stacked lots, which many years ago on Groseal, stacked lots were pretty popular, especially on the water. As you're all aware, to some degree, those can and have created some issues for the township to deal with, and also for the owners of those properties. So that's what the frontage relates to. All three of the parcels are well in excess of the 60-foot street frontage. The lot width is really more a test of the actual width of the lot itself. Both of the vacant lots would have to meet the 125-foot standard for the R1E district. As I showed you in the table a few slides ago, both meet or exceed that. The resulting remaining parcel C, which is the parcel with the residence on it on East River, that is actually deficient on lot width by about 2.5 feet. That's an existing condition, however, and there really is no impact or alteration to that condition as a result of this request. So we're not increasing nonconformity, we're not quote-unquote worsening the situation, it remains the same. Parcel shape is another one where you generally want to have parcels that are square or rectangular in nature. What this requirement does is it really helps to eliminate situations where in the future we might be setting an applicant up or setting someone up for the need for variances. You know, curvilinear lot lines, angled lot lines, pie-shaped lots, all of those types of things really tend to be difficult to develop in a conventional fashion. So you generally want to see more of a rectangular shape. And I can go back up to this real quick. As you can see, albeit resulting parcel B is not a traditional rectangle, but it is at least square-ish, 90-degree angled lot lines. You know, that it creates a sufficient area where we're not dealing with potentially variant situations in the future. On a similar end, depth to width ratio, we're generally looking for a 4-to-1 ratio or less. That really takes into account how deep the parcel is versus how wide the parcel is. Both A and B would be within the 4-to-1 standard. Resulting parcel C is a little bit out of that. I think I had it ballparked at maybe more like 7-to-1. It's a lot deeper than it is wide. If you can follow that, if you see here, it makes sense. But ultimately, while it doesn't meet that test, we're actually improving that situation. If you look at it, this through lot, actually, I think currently, the ratio is more like a 10 or a 12-to-1 on this, an incredibly deep lot that is also relatively narrow in this case. So while it's not at the 4-to-1, we're actually improving the situation as a result of this request. Easements, we've spent a little bit of time already talking about this, but it certainly is worth hitting again, make sure everybody's clear on it. The northerly 150 feet of resulting parcel B is covered by a conservation easement that is held by the Groseal Land and Nature Conservancy. There are a number of stipulations and regulations contained within that easement, and that easement is essentially passed down from owner to owner. So even though there's a potential transfer of ownership on this property, the new owners would still have to abide by all of the stipulations within that conservation easement. So again, I have a feeling we'll probably be talking more about that tonight, but that's an important point to get across. In terms of established nonconformity, there is only one nonconforming situation, and I've already mentioned that. That is the lot width on resulting parcel C, which is an existing condition not being altered whatsoever by this request. It's deficient by about 2.5 feet, maybe 2 3/4 feet, something to that effect. But again, there's no change as a result of this request. What we don't want to do in lot splits is, obviously we technically can't do it, we don't want to create nonconforming situations. We don't want to put ourselves in a position where we're worsening a nonconforming situation. So neither of those is the case in this particular request. Point number 10 here simply relates to, is there any effect on the split and transaction upon an existing special assessment district? We've discussed this with the assessor's office, and there are no issues with any special assessment district or special assessments to either of the any of the three properties that are involved in this. That's just something we always have to double check, because if somebody happens to owe a fee or owe some money as it relates to a special assessment, it's always good to bring that out and see if there's any impact on the transfer, whether it might impact how much they owe, or whether it might be something that a new owner would take on and might not even be aware of. But that's not the case here. And then my last point, in terms of the actual review standards, simply relates to the need for any permits. At this time, there are no permits that are needed. However, I've listed here a number of local regulations that will have to be complied with if this split and combination is ultimately approved, and if the new owner intends to build on either one or both of the vacant parcels. There are a number of items that they will still have to comply with, including but not limited to zoning, grading, utility extensions, engineering, woodlands ordinance, building codes, the need for permits, and potentially even your wetlands and drainage ways ordinance. So there's still a number of items that will have to be addressed if this project proceeds and if ultimately the township board approves the split and combination. Before anything occurs on that site, you can see here there are a number of ordinances that will still be in effect. And that leads me to my last slide here. Just a few additional points I wanted to bring up, whether just for information or for added discussion. There was one sheet included in the submittal, which I believe it's the engineer drawing. It's the larger sheet in your package. There is in the notes, there is a small reference to a wetland area. This is something that we looked into a little bit further. The township many years ago had a wetland inventory conducted township-wide, and there is, if you reference that map, which unfortunately I didn't have a copy of, but I was able to obtain, there is a notation of wetlands in this general vicinity. That map was never intended to be site-specific, but there is the potential that there are some wetlands in this area. As such, obviously that brings up a point of potentially discussion and or at least information whereby if there is a wetland in this area, ultimately the applicant, if this is approved, the applicant's going to be bound by your wetlands regulations, potentially even state regulations. If there are any wetland issues, then they would have to go through DEQ in order to develop or fill or grade or whatever it might be. And then there's also local requirements under your wetlands and drainage ways ordinances. So that, at least at this point, that's a point of information. May warrant some further discussion, maybe even something to bring up with the applicant specifically. Point 2 gets back to this idea of the need for utility extensions. Both the engineer and DPS have looked at their preliminary sanitary extension plans, and you'll note there's a letter from Rains in your packet, and Russ Whitman from Rains' office has indicated that this future extension is feasible, but obviously if this proceeds, they'll have to go through full engineering review, have to obtain their permits, and meet all of the local standards. Barry Sedlock, the director of DPS, has echoed Russ's sentiments, and I believe added an extra caveat basically referencing current township requirements. I did ask Barry to attend this evening, so he is here. If you have any specific utility, engineering, water, sanitary questions, Barry's your guy. I'm not going to try to step on his toes because I don't know nearly enough about it. So just to put that out there, again, as a potential discussion point. The third point gets back to the plan that I noted earlier, which makes reference to the wetland area. It does show quite a bit of grading as well as a retaining wall on the north side of resulting parcel B, the north side of the buildable area. It's outside of the conservation easement, but it is shown in that particular area. Again, this is kind of a reminder point of discussion that any of those things, be it grading, be it retaining walls, be it potentially drainage issues, those are all items that are going to have to comply at some point with current standards. You have ordinances on all of these items. The applicant's going to have to comply with those before they can do anything with this property. The last one is just a recommendation to put out there. It's a little premature, but I think it's important for the applicant to be aware, and that's why I kind of keep hitting this conservation easement. I want to make sure everybody's aware that this thing is out there, and the applicant is bound by those restrictions. What we would do is ultimately, if this request goes through, and if the applicant builds a home on resulting parcel B, we just want to put out there, at least on the record, that we're going to recommend that they put up protection fencing, generally be like snow fencing, that same type of thing that we do for tree protection. But in this case, our thought is that we would sort of demarcate the line of the conservation easement such that we ensure that there's no stacking or staging or vehicles parking or even vehicles encroaching. Sometimes people get out on site, the lines aren't as clear-cut as they are on paper in front of us, and we just want to make sure that there aren't any encroachments. We want to make sure that there isn't any damage to occur to that sensitive natural feature. So that would be a recommendation. Again, all of these are really contingent on if this project moves forward. These are all some points that are out there. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Brian. It's a lot of good information, although I would be surprised if we don't still have a lot of questions. So I will start down at this end with Brian. Are you ready?
Yeah, I don't have a lot of questions about it. It seems to meet the requirements. If we're looking strictly at the lot split and reconfiguration, not taking into account the actual buildings, which, that's a separate issue, so I have to, divide my attention from that. So, no more additional comments.
Steve?
Not too many questions. Definitely we're going to hear from the applicant?
Yes, we will.
Okay. I'll definitely hold off till
They'll be given the opportunity to.
till then.
I don't wanna speak for
Is this the same person that's going to end up owning both these proposed areas? Do you know, or is this different?
It's the Bringard Chrysler portion of the application. I believe they currently own the larger piece here.
Okay.
If everything goes through the purchase agreement, then would have them take ownership of the rest of these parcels. So then, yes, they would own the parcel A and parcel B.
Okay. I'll just wait if the applicant speaks. Thank you.
Okay. Why don't we go down to the other end? Jim?
Brian, good job. Thank you.
Thanks.
I don't have a whole lot of questions. It was pretty straightforward, I think. Nice summary. So no questions at this point in time.
Okay. Thank you, Brian. Or Jim. Ann? Ann? Sorry.
I think a very thorough search has done by the planner, and I'm satisfied with the report.
Thank you, Ann. Mr. Schweikert?
Good presentation, Brian. I think one thing it shows is the thoroughness of all the individual factors that have to go in before you actually say yes or no to a lot split. It's not just a simple blueprint or a dimension. There's all kinds of factors that you weighed in on, and so that was a really good refresher course as well. I guess one thing I would like you to comment on, if you would, if this particular lot were part of an overall subdivision, okay. Those factors you talked about with the wetlands and the grading and the slew of things that you had there at the back end of your presentation would be up in front of us as part of the review of the subdivision process. Okay? As a lot split on an individual lot, okay, they're not. They come with the actual construction process.
Right.
Am I fully correct in understanding it that way?
Yeah, if the information were available, it's always good to know, obviously. But, that really is, again, maybe this becomes a question or a point of discussion for this evening, is Commission, how do you feel, knowing that there are some wetlands in the area? We don't have a distinct boundary. We don't have a delineation that's been provided. Are you comfortable moving forward knowing that we are still governed by both local as well as state regulations on wetlands? Or is that something, do you have some additional questions potentially the applicant can address this evening, or desire additional information?
Okay. That's it.
A couple of these things I think you touched on, but I'd like you, just for clarification purposes, you mentioned a couple of times the nonconformity of Lot C here. Just to make it clear, the fact that it was in a nonconforming condition and remains in a nonconforming condition does not present any problem for us.
No.
We're not bound to fix nonconformities in these processes.
No, the review standard really relates to it from two angles. One is it gives you the ability, if we are eliminating or improving nonconforming situations by virtue of a split and or combination reconfiguration, then it allows you to take that into consideration. So, for instance, if as a result of a split we had a property that was deficient by 10 feet in lot width, and as a result of the reconfiguration, they were only deficient by 5 feet. It allows you to take that into consideration because they're improving the situation without the need for a variance, because what's there now doesn't comply. What's proposed either doesn't change or is improved upon, and it allows you as a commission to move forward in that particular situation. So, right, in this case, more to your point, there is no change. It's an existing condition. There's absolutely no impact whatsoever to the established condition. If the split, for instance, if the split were to attempt to shift this lot line, and we went from a non-conforming 77 feet, and they were proposing to take it to 65 feet, that's an issue. But in this case, it's staying as is.
And in fact improves a little bit on the lot
to
shape.
width. Correct.
Yeah, the ratios, length to width. If you could, and I don't know if this gets into more of an esoteric discussion, but we've got the question of this easement. It's a big part of this submission that we need to consider what the impact of it is, and I think, as you said, I think we'll be talking about that a little bit more. What is the township's role, and specifically the Planning Commission's role in supporting / defending / considering this conservation easement? And to make it a little more difficult, thinking to the issue we had recently with Hickory Island and certain restrictions among the Hickory Island Corporation, as I understand it, where it was not our job to stand in and protect those requirements. I hope that's not too difficult on your feet to respond. But
the latter part of that, I'm going to kind of go backwards and reverse it here on you. The latter part of that has to do with private association and bylaws and their own requirements. The township is not obligated to enforce a neighborhood association's bylaws. So, for instance, if our zoning ordinance says a certain dimension, a certain setback, that's what we follow. If there's something in the bylaws that's different, or if the bylaws require, pink houses every fifth house, it's not something that we are bound to uphold. I will tell you what the township does do is try to put a best effort forth, because most of the associations are known and staff is aware of them, and so they'll generally bring that to an owner or an applicant's attention and say, just so you know, you should also look into this, but we're not obligated to uphold that. In the case of the easement, really demonstrating both its location as well as its stipulations as part of this process for a lot split, you need to provide this information. It's required information, and since this is something we're aware of, I really think it's important to make sure that we hit that home and that we speak to this tonight. For instance, if the applicant, was unaware of it and showed, can't get my cursor back, and as I mentioned earlier, they stopped the envelope short because they know what their buildable area is and what their buildable area is not. However, if they would have continued and attempted to show an envelope for this full property, obviously, it would be, within our best interest to make sure we bring that up, make sure the applicant understands, you can't build within there, and also to protect the interests of the Land and Nature Conservancy as well. So, as I see it, it is part of this process because it is required information to be provided as part of the split process.
But just, I guess, if I'm hearing you correctly, what you're saying is, if we were to inform the applicant that their plan, let's say, as you said, their building envelope went, into the conservation easement, we would be required to inform them of that, but it's not our job to enforce it. In other words, if they didn't have a buildable lot without going into that, would we be constrained to reject the proposal?
I think potentially we would, yes.
Okay. All right.
We probably, I have had some contact with the township attorney. We didn't come to full resolution on any of the matters, but certainly I think that is a situation where we don't want to create an unbuildable property.
Okay.
And if the property was covered by an easement which prohibited any construction on it, then it would not be in our best interest to approve it.
Okay. So it sounds like what we need to be concerned with is, how they shape their house and whatever is their problem. But if there is a buildable property there that doesn't encroach, then we have no prohibition on approving it.
Correct.
Okay. You mentioned the snow fence, et cetera. I know we've talked about doing that around at least significant trees. Mm-hmm. As I recall, there's a pretty significant tree right kind of at the corner, if I read that right on the map or on the plat.
There's a few of them. Yeah, that was one of my references, kind of in that next to closing slide. Just when I kind of rattled off all of the other ordinances that come into play, if this split combination ultimately is approved, and if the applicant comes forward with the intent to build on this property, it is very likely that the requirements and restrictions of the Township Woodland Ordinance are going to come into play. I keep missing it. Just to kind of go back to my aerial photo, we're generally talking about kind of this area in here. You can see just from the aerial, there's a significant number of pretty mature trees. So this is something that will also have to be addressed, assuming the project gets to that point.
Okay.
So tree protection would obviously come up if approved and if the applicant builds on the property.
Okay. Next, a few questions here, and I think you touched on them, but drainage is significantly appears to be an issue with this property, and we can see from the more detailed drawing that there is a fair amount of improvements to the drainage, and I realizing that we don't have all of that in front of us at this point. If you could maybe go back to our what we need to consider here. So, for example, if there was a drainage problem or sewer problem or whatever it may be, that would mean that this would just not be a buildable lot, property B. If I heard you correctly, that is what we should be considering, not necessarily how they're going to do it, but can it be done?
Yes.
Okay.
The details of how it will be done would all come out in essentially in the construction, the building, the review process.
Okay. There's a retaining wall portrayed in the map also. Are there setback requirements for retaining walls, or can those be right up to the property line?
Well, there are in certain instances. Your grading ordinance actually has several different scenarios for retaining walls. The one thing I would point out on that is that technically, if you recall this, if this were to be approved, then this is no longer a property line. So if that retaining wall went in there, that retaining wall is 150 plus feet off of the side lot line, which is now here. just for a clarification point.
No, that's helpful.
But they, you know, they would be bound again by the specific requirements of your grading ordinance. So whether it's for the actual grading, whether it's for construction of retaining walls, or a combination, that will be reviewed by the township engineer for compliance with your grading ordinance.
Okay, so it is, parcel B is all one parcel. The fact that there may be a retaining wall right up to the conservation easement does not necessarily subject to, adverse impact on the conservation easement, et cetera.
Not necessarily, but obviously it would have to be reviewed. Raines will do a good job reviewing the entire grading plan, understanding that there are certain protections and limitations on what can and cannot occur to the property within that easement. I think that's something that they would have to take into consideration.
Okay. Well, I guess in summary, and it goes back to I think it was point 10, zoning, grading, utilities, including sanitary sewer, engineering, woodlands, wetlands, all really get implicated here. And I guess it's number 11. Sorry, it's close. I guess what we're left to judge here is we don't want to, I guess to put it straight, we don't want to approve a lot reconfiguration that results in a non-buildable lot.
Exactly.
A, it doesn't make people happy, and B, it's an amount of work that causes a lot of confusion for people. And so I guess I'd want to hear the applicant's thoughts on obtaining those permits, understanding they haven't had to get any of them, and we have some at least tentative approval from engineering on the sanitary sewer. Mr. Lemoyne, I see.
Yeah, no, you raised the point that really is sticking out in my mind, and that aerial photo, I think, gives best justice to it. If we've spent this much time on this process so far, and your time, and we've yet to answer if any of this tree area is wetlands, that may kill this whole project. So why have we not addressed that first to say, yes, wetlands isn't going to be an issue? I'm just surprised why it's not been addressed at the onset.
I'll be honest with you, it just came up. Literally, this just came up the other day as a question. The plans don't show any wetlands. If there were wetlands there, they should be shown. It doesn't show any. There's one small notation on the plan, which technically should not have even been included in your packet, quite frankly. That engineered drawing really, I think, has confused the matter more than anything else. So that's all it is. The wetlands thing only came up recently. We've not seen anything other than the general township map, which indicates there are, or at least were, that map is 20-some years old. There were wetlands in this general vicinity. Whether or not that prohibits, building on resulting parcel B is, I guess, up for debate. Typically, my guess is it probably would not, but that's a guess. That's all that is.
Thanks, Steve. Mr. Schwickert?
Mr. Chairman, I've been thinking about this as we've been talking, and I want to build on Steve's comment a little bit. I recall two cases over the last 20 years where the Planning Commission has been involved in individual lots and individual building sites relative to wetlands. One was at Haley Crescent.
Yep.
It was the 20-year saga of a road extension into a wetland, of an applicant trying to configure a house on a property which was heavily regulated under wetlands. Okay, and the Planning Commission, under the Wetlands Ordinance, was heavily engaged in that before the township construction process was actually even underway. It was all regulated under the Wetlands Ordinance. We had a similar situation on Meridian on the north end, on a vacant piece of property that had an island in it. In essence, a DEQ island in the middle of it that enabled an applicant to build a house. Okay,
Yep.
There, the Wetlands Ordinance was in fact being applied to an individual lot. Okay, I want to be certain that we're consistent here. So I guess I'll come back to my question again. If this is not part of the lot split approval, okay, how would that come into play? How would that ordinance come into play? Because theoretically, we say, hey, it's a great idea, split the lot, run the reconfiguration. The board approves it. 6 months down the road, it comes to the building department, and you guys look at it and say, hey, we want a wetland survey. Now we find out that the wetlands ordinance applies, and things that we said in terms of having a buildable lot with all these setback areas no longer apply. How do these things mesh? I mean, is this in the right order?
Well, again, I mean, the survey does not show any wetlands. So, to my knowledge, I don't know that there are wetlands there. There's the potential that there are. If that's the case, and if this commission is uncomfortable proceeding, then I would suggest, well, number one, we still haven't even heard from the applicant tonight, so they may have some answers to these questions. Number two, if you're not comfortable proceeding with that out there, then I would suggest that you ask the applicant to go out and obtain a better survey which identifies any wetlands in the area.
Brian, maybe you can address a question that's bouncing around in my mind. If you could solve some of those as we go, you'd be a miracle worker. But the question that's running through my mind is, let's say we go ahead and we approve the lot reconfiguration, and we say, look, caveat emptor, you've got a lot of hurdles to cross, and they're your problem. What's the downside to the township, either the planning commission or not, besides the fact that it takes township planning time and things like that? Is there a downside?
I don't think there's a downside either way, truthfully. I mean, it's really your commission. You're put in place to make recommendations on important considerations such as these. If you are not comfortable or not confident in a decision based on information presented to you, I guess I would suggest that you hold back and try to get answers to that or get that information. If you are confident moving forward, you still have the knowledge and understanding they're going to have to comply with your wetlands requirements one way or another, if applicable. That's really the question, I guess, that's out there at this point.
And to Mr. Schweikert's point, what would be the trigger that would trigger the wetlands assessment?
In terms of?
Is that part of the site plan that they would have to prepare in order
Typically, yes.
to build? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, in this case, it's not an established lot. If this were just an existing lot and somebody came in and they showed wetlands on the property, it would be reviewed and addressed accordingly. In this instance, we're creating a new lot. We don't have wetland information. Therefore, we don't know if it's going to apply or not.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, could you show that drainage ways map?
Yep. A sec here. I'm going to have to get out of this because the keyboard doesn't work. Well, the keyboard works now. No, keyboard doesn't work. Yeah, I do actually have that map in here. Bear with me for a sec, guys. Here we go. So this is just an excerpt of the township map. If I can scroll in.
There's one.
Here we go. So reference back to the maps we've looked at, Horse Mill, East River, Park Lane. So you can see in the general vicinity, south of Horse Mill, east of Park Lane, there's an area that 20 years ago was targeted as having some wetlands there.
Okay. Thank you, Brian. I think we've beaten this up enough that I think it's time to hear from the applicant, unless somebody else has something to say before we get to that point. Applicant, if you'd like to step forward. Please state your name and address for the record.
Jared Bringard, address 20136 East River Road. Maybe we can cut this short. I mean, the wetlands issue is brand new to us. I'm not sure we want to proceed if we are ultimately going to be turned down for building because of a wetlands issue. Doesn't seem to make sense to us.
Okay.
I have no idea what the procedure is. And we assume when we put this proposal first together, this has a long shaggy dog story to it. Maybe I can just burden the committee for a couple of minutes.
Sure.
About 8 months after we bought the property in which our home is, we bought this property in the back. The idea was a vision in my mind to ultimately build 2 homes for my 2 daughters. Didn't know whether that would ever come to pass, whether my daughters would want to stay here or whatever. My 2 daughters love this island and they want to go ahead and do it. At the time, I think the ordinance was you could have a lot split of 100 feet. It was only when we started to go ahead with this project a couple of years ago, I learned, to my dismay, that the lot requirements now are 125 feet, and we assume, perhaps incorrectly, that we would never get a variance to do 200 lot splits. And with that in mind, we found out that, and we knew that the property to the north of us was subject to the conservancy law. But if we were going to go ahead with this, and with the sense that we would never get a lot split of our existing property, 100, we decided to go ahead and approach Tammy and Bruce Rink to see if they were interested. At the time, we thought they just owned the 75 feet. We found out that they owned the additional 75 feet, and they didn't want to sell one without the other. So we said, okay, that's fine with us. We have no desire to encroach on the land conservation or anything like that. I just want to build 2 homes for my daughters. It's the only way I know how to do it. So this tonight is a surprise to us, and there's no sense moving, I don't think, forward if the wetlands are ultimately going to crush us. We've addressed some of these other issues that I think on that last slide, that last paragraph, and I think we've had some encouragement that these hurdles can be crossed, but the wetlands, I'm not so sure. And I think we'd be foolish to proceed before that was done. I have no idea how to do it, but, well, I guess we'll have to figure it out.
Brian, maybe you could, we've talked a little bit about ordering of the steps. In light of what Mr. Bringard is suggesting, that he would like some clarity on the wetlands question before incurring additional time and expense. To paraphrase, what recommendation might you make in that regard?
Yeah, I guess if that's the case, I would suggest that they have their surveyor go back out and do their research, do their due diligence, walk the property, survey it, stake it. If need be, you might have to go beyond a traditional land surveyor. You might have to engage the services of an environmental engineer or wetland specialist to go out and really identify the area. Again, the township map that I showed earlier is pretty generic. It shows that there was a wetland in that general area. It is not parcel specific, so we don't know whether it does or does not encroach onto your property or your potential property.
If there was a partial encroachment and we were still able to figure out how to put a house on with that, would that be a showstopper? So if I understand it, what we need to do is find out whether they're wetlands or not and the exact location, and then see whether we can work around that. Is that my understanding?
Yeah, I think that's right, Mr. Bringard. I think
so. Even if it encroached partially on the property, if we could figure out a way to build around that, that would be okay?
Yeah, Mr. Stryker?
Yes. Wetlands is not in and of itself a showstopper. Okay, Brian, there's regulations. Just we don't regulate wetlands that are small wetlands. Okay, first of all, okay, and if your wetlands are on a part of the property that's not where your house is at, it's not a factor. Okay, people have worked through these issues before successfully. Okay, so don't let that scare you. I mean, it's just a matter of having the right information.
Is it, would a surveyor be able to identify this? I'm not sure of the procedure. How do you identify what portion of any property is wetlands?
Yeah, Brian, maybe you can best answer that question.
Again, my suggestion would probably be, just because you have a relationship already, start with your surveyor. They may or may not be able to do it. You may have to engage the services of somebody, with an expertise in wetland demarcation. But I would start there.
Oh, Brian, do we have a wetland map ourselves other than the one you showed us?
That's the only one I'm aware of.
Well, then the surveyor, with that and contacting the state, would be able to determine whether it was there or not.
Are wetlands, this will show my ignorance, but
it's so
are
small.
wetlands, do they come and go from time to time? What was once a wetland may be a dry one?
Yes, that is true.
Absolutely.
That is absolutely true. And conversely, what was once a dry land may be a wetland. But certainly, the fact that there is a crayon-drawn blob somewhere near this property tells us that it's
so
a concern,
small.
but it doesn't
So small.
necessarily mean that
And it's so small that the state wouldn't have anything to do with it anyway.
Yeah, so I
Is
think...
it possible to turn a wetland into a dry land? That's what I was thinking.
Just know that something's there.
Yeah,
Anything else?
I think what you're hearing is that it's not necessarily a showstopper, although, as we've indicated, there are a number of, wetlands isn't the only one. As you've indicated, you've looked at most of the others and seen your way through to believe that you can satisfy those. But, wetlands, I think, goes on that list, and I think a conversation with your surveyor may help you to determine whether, it's a large concern or a small concern or no concern.
Once we talk with our surveyor on that, what type of certification do we need? Is it the certification of the surveyor, or do we then have to jump through some more hoops, or what? Can you tell us, Brian, what can our surveyor says? Look at it, looks fine to me.
Well, it really depends on, what they uncover. I mean, if he uncovers nothing and is willing to, put his stamp and his name and his signature on that, that's fine. If he does find something, then that, potentially we need to identify where it is. We need to see it on the survey itself, and then really determine, if it is there is something, doesn't have any impact on that buildable area.
Can we take his certification to the bank, so to speak? He certifies it, or do we?
If that's something that's within his expertise, then sure. I mean, he's a registered land surveyor. As I mentioned, he may or may not be able to do that accurately, but he certainly, if he cannot, my guess is he can point you in the right direction, or at least help you through the process.
Okay, what you're saying is then that we have to have someone who is recognized as an expert, and if that, whoever that expert may be, if we get the certification, then we should be clear as far as that issue goes.
Yeah, I believe that's right. I think one of the things to help understand is that surveyors aren't, they don't just hang out a shingle and say, I'm a surveyor because I've got a measuring tape. They go through a certification and registration process that they put at risk every time they certify one of these drawings. So there's it's a professional standard that they apply, and they, as I said, they put their license at risk by making these certifications. So he's not likely to, or he or she or they are not likely to, do that without some significant consideration of whether or not they have the ability to do that.
And I assume it isn't free.
Few things are. as you'll learn as you start the construction process.
I've already had quite an education getting where we are with the sewer and on and on and on and on.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
My name is Adam Chrysler. I'm a co-applicant with my wife, Jillian. And I live on 25175 Dallas Road, Grosse Ile, Michigan. A long-time resident, past Commodore, and pro bono IT director for the Grosse Ile Boar's Head Festival. So really contribute to the township here, whatever the best I can. Just going off the same points, I don't have that much to be said other than what's already been said. Both my wife and I have helped to pay for and develop the where we are today, and we're going to pay for our house and develop that too if it is acceptable and all parties agree. I just maybe have a suggestion. Maybe to if there was a motion, perhaps there would be a motion to approve pending written approval by a certified surveyor that there is no wetland conflict, and that way, perhaps we could move the apple cart a little bit further, and everybody would still feel comfortable as they wish. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that it? Okay. Mr. Bringer, anything else? Okay. All right. You may be called back.
Any questions?
Does anybody on the commission have any questions for the applicant? I'm sorry. Forgot that portion of the fund. No, none right now.
Okay, great.
We're going to turn to the audience next for any comments from the audience on the information you've heard so far, or any other questions you might have. Yes? State your name and address, please.
Pat Selby, 8525 Sherwood, here on the island, and I'm Vice President of the Conservancy. And we really don't have much to add this evening. We do want to thank the Commission and the Planner for the respect you have for the conservation easement and the limitations. And that's why I said we don't have a great deal to add. We'll be interested if the project does go forward with permitting and construction to protect the easement. But we're also interested in working with the landowner to understand that he is going to own that land. And there's many things he can do with it, and just help him understand the limitations. So, but thank you again.
Thank you, Pat. Anybody else in the audience?
Do I have to come up there?
Yes, sir.
No.
We won't bite. State your name and address, please.
My name is Chris Clanton. I live at 22101 Sylvan Drive in Brownstown. I'm just here as a graduate from a graduate class. I just had a general question. Looking at the aerial view, is the wetlands really a big consideration because the land has already been developed so much for the subdivision area? I don't see why that should be such an issue because it's a small patch of woods. If it was a wetlands area, it's been destroyed so much because of the building around it that it shouldn't be a big issue now, because if it was a wetlands, it's gone now. If it's a wet area, it's mainly due because of the runoff of the subdivision's manicured lawns and the roofs. So I don't see, and I don't know the process here, it's just observation. I don't see why this should be an issue.
Well, just reacting in general, I think you probably heard a little bit of that same sentiment from Ms. Jaworowski about the fact that it's a relatively small patch of wetlands that probably isn't going to attract a great deal of attention, but it's worth checking out, I think, is what you're hearing from the commission.
Okay.
But it is an excellent point that, as Mr. Bringard suggested, that sometimes wetlands are no longer wetlands and they become dry lands. So whether they're wet or not, it doesn't necessarily, as we know, make the difference whether it's technically a wetland or not.
Okay,
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other comments from the audience? We have Mr. Sedlock here. Does anybody have any questions for him?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to get a brief summary from him regarding what the issue is that he and Mr. Whitman from CE Rains were so concerned about, just to understand it.
Sure. Good evening. I think the concerns that were expressed in the letter from the CE Rains Company are basically my sentiments also. The main concern is the depth of the sanitary sewer in that area. The sanitary sewer was extended north into this property some time ago at the expense of Mr. Bringard and his family. Then, at that particular point where the sanitary sewer left off, it was very shallow at that point. But they probably could make it work with some unique things that can be done today. Extending it the additional distance even makes it a little bit worse because obviously the flow is by gravity, and the more you extend it, the shallower it gets. I think when it gets to this property right now, it's only about 3.5 feet deep. At that particular point, a basement with sanitary facilities, toilet, shower, are out of the question. So knowing that information and designing around it, you can overcome these handicaps. You can use the basement for gray water, laundry tub, washing clothes, but you have to put in what they call an effluent pump, which pumps that effluent up into a sewer that's higher up for discharge. In my comment, in my memo to the commission, the township does not allow grinder pumps. And there's a difference between an effluent pump and a grinder pump. The effluent pump just pumps liquid, laundry tub water, wash machine water. A grinder pump actually grinds sewage and lifts it or sends it to a predetermined location. And right now, the policy with the township is we only allow grinder pumps in a situation where we have a failed septic system and the owner has no alternative to get rid of his sewage. So we only have we have 3 or 4 of these on the island right now that have served that purpose. But right now, the grinder pump is not used for new construction. But, as it says in Mr. Rains' letter, that doesn't deem this project not feasible. It's feasible to do this if you know what the constraints are. So they obviously can work around these. One stipulation that the engineer requested was due to the fact that this sanitary sewer is so shallow, they'd have to protect it with some insulation so it doesn't freeze. But all of these things are not, like you said, a showstopper. These are just constraints that they have to work within. And I'm sure with the guidance of CE Rains, with the applicant, that these issues can be worked out. So that basically that's the main issue, sanitary sewer. And you'll see in his report also that they propose to extend the main line further than they really have to. They said they could shorten it by like 40 feet because there's no purpose in extending it any further than beyond where these folks can hook to it, because it's so shallow at that point it's going to become unusable for anything further north. So basically that was what Russ's comments are in a nutshell.
Mr. Sedlock, there's also a comment in the letter from Mr. Whitman. The grades should be lowered over to the sewer to provide a maximum 6.5% slope on the drive. 16% is shown and is too steep.
Yeah.
What does that mean? I don't understand what that means.
What apparently is shown on the drawing is the driveway coming off the main road has an incline of 16% slope as it comes from the road into the property. And I think, and don't hold me to this, I think the maximum that you can do in an off-driveway approach is around 10%.
Okay.
So you'd have to reduce the percent of slope on that driveway approach coming into the property, and consequently, it would make the distance of the depths of that sewer even a little shallower than it is already.
Okay. All right, thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Sedlock?
That's good.
No.
Okay.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Your time wasn't wasted.
Yeah, anytime.
Any other questions from the audience? Comments? All right. Hearing none, we'll bring it back to the Planning Commission. We'll start at the other end this time. Jim, do you have any further comments, questions?
All valid points thus far. Obviously, the wetland issue is probably the biggest issue, I'm assuming, at this point in time. But I don't have any further questions at this point in time.
Okay. If you might kind of give an idea of what your sentiments are on the question of whether we are going to move forward, whether you believe we should move forward this evening. Or you can defer.
I think the issue is to split the lots, and the wetland, if you could leave that on the table to have that looked into further. I guess looking at that first, and then do the lot split after. Might be willing to move forward on a vote like that.
Okay, thank you. Ann? Yes, sorry.
Well, I think everything is pretty clear as to what's needed, and the only question I have has to do with the wetland, but it's so small, and it doesn't seem to interfere with the buildable part of the lot. And on that basis, I would think that this could go forward, and if there's a need to have it verified, just to be sure that it's almost undistinguishable would be fine. But it could involve a little bit more time, but I don't think we could hold it, but should hold it up for just that certification.
A question for Brian. I don't know whether you know the answer to this question, but if we were to move this forward to Township Board action, how soon would they hear this, and would there be time to do the wetlands investigation in the meantime?
Well, Mr. Chair, my suggestion would be if the commission is open to moving this forward upon a condition of further wetland investigation, my recommendation would be that be addressed prior to it being heard by the board. That way the board gets one neat, tidy package, and we don't have any outstanding issues or any of these open-ended questions at that point. So, really, I think, and again, I'm not trying to push the commission one way or another. If you're open to that, if you're not comfortable with that, you could table and request the verification on your own, and then rehear the new information before making a recommendation. But if you're comfortable moving forward, then I would suggest it be done before the board hear it.
And I guess that I think was my question. Do we think, would that be heard a week and a half, or next Monday, or 2 weeks from tonight, or something like that, or would it be a month or two down the road, which would give them time to do the investigation of the wetlands?
I would suggest that it not be presented to them until the applicant has provided the information. So if it takes them a week to do it, we could put them on the next available agenda. If it takes them a month to do it, we would put them on the next available agenda. At that point, the timeline really becomes dictated by the applicant and and their professionals.
Okay, thank you. I mean, not presupposing the desire of the commission, but just to help understand what the options are. Thank you. Steve?
Well, definitely, first I want to say thank you. I applaud anybody looking to build homes nowadays, and I think that's great. I also applaud you from a personal standpoint of how you want to keep the family together. I think that speaks a lot to you and your family values and integrity and doing the right thing. So I look up to that, and thank you. To the Conservancy for being here and showing your support, I think that's real important. I think you have some homeowners here that value what you do, that value and respect the space, and I think could help enhance the space if they were next to it. Short of going out there with a shop vac and making sure there's no water, I can tell you I do support this project going forward with them verifying that it is not in existence, or that even if it is in existence, I think they would respect it, and it would fall outside of their buildable area. So as long as it doesn't affect what we've seen tonight, that's where I feel myself. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Brian?
Well, I believe that Steve said best about the thank you, so I'll just concur, but I can't top that. I want to say that I was concerned for the applicants about the fees. I want to make sure that like they've already probably prepaid for all of this, so I want to make sure that they don't just leave the process now because the decision they've already paid for that. It would be good to look through the process, and there's always the chance of approval. Everything that I've seen so far, I mean, I'm in support of the split, and I think the split is, one specific issue, and it meets everything from that standpoint, in my viewpoint. Additionally, there's the issue about the buildability, but I think that's more so about the design that they pick for the lot, which again is a separate issue, and the decision of the applicant. So, and then as far as the wetlands themselves, there could even be wetlands on the lot, but they're isolated wetlands that aren't connecting to any streams. They don't feed into any larger significant wetlands. So, again, I don't see how that's a deal breaker. So again, I feel pretty comfortable moving forward with this.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Schweikert?
Well, taking a look at the wetlands ordinance, we define the protected wetlands as something that says not contiguous to any lake, pond, river, or stream, and more than 2 acres in size. More than 2 acres in size is the thing that's here. This looks to be an isolated wetland. So 2 acres in size is roughly 85,000 square feet. Okay? If I'm just looking at the map that Brian put up, it's got a scale of 1/8 equals 1,000 feet. And looking at that little rectangle that he pointed to, that little rectangle is approximately 200,000 square feet. In other words, 4 acres, give or take, 5 acres, if it's there. Okay? So, it looks small in the drawing, but in fact, it is potentially well in the range of being a regulated wetland.
And it's in his area?
I don't know that.
Okay, we don't know that, right?
I can't tell that.
Okay.
The same reason that Brian couldn't tell it, I can't tell it from this drawing either. There's no property overlaid on this map. Okay, so, to me this is significant, and I think there's a bigger issue here, and that bigger issue is consistency. Okay, the Planning Commission, like I said, over the years, was very precise and very detailed with the applicant on Haley Crescent. We were very precise and very consistent in terms of seeing information, validating information on the wetlands single lot issue on north end of Meridian. I don't see how we can apply a different standard to this applicant. I think the applicant needs to go off, get the information. Maybe it's nothing, okay? I absolutely would not give up on the project. I would simply go get the information and let's see what it says, okay? And then see if there's an issue here or not. But in either case, we've done due diligence. The applicant isn't going to be surprised when it comes time for going to get a permit, and then having, at that point, with a lot split already completed, already paid the money, already bought the property, and then he walks in and says, well, gee, now we need a wetland application. Oh, by the way, you can't build. That is absolutely unfair. Okay, I think that due diligence requires this commission to require that information to come back to us. We'll look at it. We'll see how it fits with the 25-foot setback, with the wetlands, with we'll have the whole picture in front of us, and then we make a logical decision. That is consistency, okay? And I think we would have a hard time applying the consistent standard to the next applicant that's in this situation if we don't follow the process. So my vote on this is to use the drainage ways and wetlands map for exactly what it's intended to be, an indication that requires further investigation.
Okay.
Get that information, then we make a decision.
All right.
That's what I think.
That's pretty much what we've said.
Well, I think it's interesting. I think I'm hearing some different points of view, frankly, which is fine. That's why we're here. Otherwise, we'd have one person sitting up here. And I think the question revolves around one question, and that is, if wetlands is a threshold question, what's the best way to deal with it? Is the best way to deal with it as have the applicant go out and do the investigation and then come back to allow us to do the assessment that Mr. Schweikert has reviewed, which is, does the building envelope infringe on not only the wetlands but also the necessary setbacks from those wetlands, and that assumes that the wetlands are even exist and are a protected wetland. As has been indicated, it's possible that 4 acres is no longer larger than 2 acres and therefore is not something that would be protected. I think those are some serious questions that we have to answer, and as Mr. Schweikert commented, we went through a fairly significant amount of work with respect to a previous property and spent a lot of time. Mr. Bringer, one moment, please. I absolutely want to hear from you. And so I think what we're left with is the question of do we want to approve this pending the review, bring it back and have full Planning Commission review, or to approve it contingent upon our planning department reviewing it and determining that it clearly does not violate, or it's a question and therefore needs to come back, or something of that nature. So with that question on the board, Mr. Bringer, I'm guessing you might want to address some of those options.
Maybe I can set your mind at ease. I mean, I think it's, I'm perfectly happy with your holding your approval till we get it. I think it's just a matter of whether you approve it subject to this or wait until we get it. What I would like assurance, though, is this is the only thing we need to do in order to get the approval. In other words, the sense I'm hearing is that the board is in favor of approving this, and the real concern is, do you approve it subject to the wetland designation or not, or do you wait and do the whole thing? I'm perfectly happy waiting if I get the sense that we could, once we get that, whatever we need, we could come back, get on the agenda fairly quickly, and it would just be a matter of this commission saying, yes, you've got the certification, or no, you don't, and that's all we need to do, and we're fine. I would hate to be in a process where we do start all over again. Is that a fair way to proceed?
Yeah, if I could comment on 2 aspects of what you've asked, and one of them I'd like to ask if I'll give my thoughts on it, and I'll ask other commissioners to comment separately. The first one being, you mentioned coming back fairly quickly. That's subject to our regularly scheduled meeting, and as we are currently thinking, we're probably not going to meet in December, and that'll carry us into January, and I don't know whether that causes a problem for your building schedule plans. I don't know if you've got...
Does.
Okay. So that would be the first. And the second is, I think what I'm hearing from the commission is that if, for example, the sewer issue was one that we thought created a significant hurdle that you wouldn't be able to cross, then that would remain as a question. And so in part it goes back to you that if you're satisfied that the sewer doesn't cause a problem, the drainage doesn't cause a problem, the woodlands ordinance doesn't cause a problem, those sorts of things. What I'm hearing from the commission is that there's a fair amount of satisfaction that none of those are going to cause you an insurmountable problem, and the one potential insurmountable problem is the wetlands ordinance. And if that's overcome, then you would be home free, at least for the lot reconfiguration. So that's my sense from hearing the comments of the commission. I wonder if anybody had any different thoughts.
I agree.
Right. So I guess what I'm saying is you're not going to get from us absolutely, this is the only question we'll be looking at, but the sense of the commission is that there's nothing else that gives us any concern, and we would not expect that when we see you again, we certainly have no interest in having you come before us multiple times. We want to see you with your building permit and
you want to see those 2 houses closed so you can collect taxes, right?
And the kids in the schools, right? Those are the things that we're after. So, but keeping in mind that we have to protect many of the things that we are here to protect, and as it seems, the one hurdle that may present a problem for you is the wetlands, and we don't want to see you or us in a situation where you've got a partial approval but you really can't do it, and we end up arguing about it. And if we could do this in a more orderly fashion, that's fantastic. We just don't want to cause any problems for you. So if you're telling us that you're okay coming back to see us in January with an approved certification from your surveyor I think that kind of solves all of our problems, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's what
Are there,
I'm just wondering if there are some of these other issues you feel that may come up on the agenda. Are there questions we could answer tonight, maybe to set your mind at ease a bit, or not? I mean, or do you think these are things you haven't thought about and may want to think more about and may want to talk more about, or what? I mean, if there's anything you have tonight that we could address from some of these other issues, we'd be pleased to do that, so we could smooth the process in January.
Well, I think, as I said, I don't think we perceive those as being showstoppers, but, for example, the sewer question, I think what we've heard is that it is feasible. How exactly that will be done, and is it possible, the problem with doing engineering without breaking ground is that you don't know what you're going to find once you break the ground. And so therefore, it's possible that something may come up. We're not of a high enough level of concern at this point, given what we've heard from Mr. Raines and Mr. Sedlock, from Mr. Sedlock, that we would hold up the lot reconfiguration as a result of it. The drainage question is one that it's a significant issue. You can't create drainage problems for your neighbors, and that would include, I think, your property that has an interest.
Our neighbor is a conservancy.
And so, those are questions, but, they're not insurmountable. And so unless you wanted to address some of those, I would suggest that the commission isn't going to hold up your approval for that. So,
we don't want to waste your time.
Your son-in-law's waving. I don't know if he still wants to speak. Ask for permission from your father-in-law.
I was just going to say my father-in-law is very wise. And, but another alternative to, if we're waiting to January and, let's assume that everything, this committee was satisfied, and then it waits for the board meeting. That might not make January. That might be February, and then it keeps on going on. Another possible recommendation would be that a motion would be made to approve, pending the engineer approving that after we do our due diligence, that he reviews the site survey. So instead of you having to hear and physically witness a piece of paper with a stamp on it, you could approve pending that your township engineers did review the piece of paper with a stamp on it, and then that would cut probably 2 or 3 months out.
Mr. Schweikert.
Okay, I want to make sure I understand this. Okay, basically, it's a gate. Okay, in essence, if the survey goes off, okay, and comes back and says there are no wetlands, or insignificant wetlands, basically a finding of no finding, if you know what I mean.
Correct. Yeah.
Then your suggestion is at that point that the application goes straight to the board with a recommendation from the planning commission.
That's right. We would.
And if on the other hand it comes back and says, well, we're kind of not sure, or there's some potential factor here that the planning commission needs to be aware of, as determined by the planner, then the next step would be the planning commission meeting. Is that what you're advocating?
Yeah, if the planner isn't satisfied that there is an objective certainty to the civil engineering, then it would come back to you, ladies and gentlemen. But if he is satisfied that there is objective certainty that there's no issue, then we wouldn't have to burden you with another meeting on the same issue.
Okay with that.
Any thoughts on that from the commission? I've seen a few nods, but anybody want to do something other than nod?
No, I just one thought though, Brian. That puts you in the situation of being the judge. Is that an issue?
I don't think so. I mean, I'll do whatever the will of the commission is. I mean, honestly, you still have to make a recommendation. It still has to go through the board before anything is done and final with this. So if you want to give me the the ability to determine whether or not it needs to come back to you or whether it can move on to the board, I certainly will do the best job that I can. If you'd rather see it yourselves, that's always fine too.
You know, that meets my requirement of due diligence. If there's anything positive that is suspect, then we meet, and we do exactly what it is that we always do. Okay? If, on the other hand, the finding is negative, okay, it is a non-issue, and again, we've done our due diligence. So I think that's a reasonable approach.
Based on what I've heard, that sounds like at least the basis for a motion. Mr. Stryker, would you like to make the motion?
Do I have to say that again?
I'll just say second to what he said.
Okay.
To avoid making the motion.
The motion is to recommend approval of lot split reconfiguration number 378, contingent upon a finding, a wetlands finding validated by our planner that wetlands are not issues, that there are no wetlands issues that require planning commission review. Okay. Further, you know, I would say you also had in your recommendations about the fence. Okay. And include the fence in the approval step because that was a prudent thing that you recommended. Was there anything else? And the obvious assumption is, you know, the opposite of that statement, original statement, is that if a wetland is found, the next step is the planning commission. A significant wetland, a significant protected wetland. Let's put it that way.
Yes, that's important.
Did I get it?
That sounded right to me. Mr. Borden, could you maybe read that back to us? Something approximating.
I have a recommendation of approval contingent upon a wetlands finding to be validated by the township planner that there are no significant issues. Further conditioned upon provision of snow fencing if ultimately approved and developed. Then lastly, sort of the opposite of the initial statement, which is that if there are significant concerns related to the wetlands, then we will bring it back before the Planning Commission.
The only thing I would say there is we need to put in the word protected wetlands. Okay, there can be wetlands, but they may not be protected. Mm-hmm. As per the definition.
Did I hear a second, Ann?
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Nay? No nays. It's approved.
Maybe.
I'd like to thank the applicants for their patience and the audience members for their patience as well. I hope that you can see that we are at least not discouraging of development. We're trying to find a way to get there without not following our duties. So we appreciate your patience with us and helping us through the issues we're facing. So good luck. We're going to take a 5-minute break. We just have a few things here, so hopefully we'll be moving on quickly. The first question, before we move on to the rest of it, Lori, there's been a suggestion that maybe the Planning Commission would benefit from a copy of the wetlands map for each of us. So if you could make that sort of magic happen, we'd appreciate it. Thank you. It's going to take me a moment here to dig down to the notes here. Okay. Next up is the chair's report. And we've got a few things here. As some of you may recall, we've talked about road ends a few times. And our last discussion was that, I guess a little more background, the Planning Commission has been investigating options regarding the transfer of ownership of certain road ends that dead end essentially at the water. And most of those are currently owned by, or at least the rights to those are owned by Wayne County. And the question is, what should we do vis-a-vis Wayne County and trying to obtain rights and/or ownership to those properties? At a previous meeting, we formulated a number of questions for the township attorney. Brian was going to talk to Mr. Look and provide some written feedback. And the outcome of that feedback will help to influence where we go with this, because a number of questions were raised about liabilities and rights to those properties, et cetera, and how that transfer goes. So, Brian, if you could maybe update us on where we stand with that, we'd appreciate it.
I'll try to be brief here, although the clocks weren't set back, right? It's not really 10 o'clock.
It is not 10 o'clock. No.
Okay, never mind. Now I'm going to take all night. I'm teasing. Yeah, just
I'm going to get fired if we run meetings this
quick. Just real quickly. So a great summary. Bill, Look, and I have been in conversation. We've exchanged a number of emails. Bill has taken all the questions that you put forth, and he's reviewing statute and case law as it relates to road ends, particularly at the water. Bill did have some follow-up questions that I have to get back to him on. So understand that this is maybe taking a little bit longer than I had hoped, but it's just due in part to mostly on my end. I don't want this to be a reflection on Bill that you don't have your answers yet. It's really on me. Just a bit busy with all the other things going on, especially in the township. So I do expect that I will get back with him this week, which will put us in a position where I'll have his responses formulated to all of your questions at whatever our next meeting is, be it December, January, whatever it might be.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate you taking the responsibility for that. And if you wouldn't mind, since our next meeting is not likely to be anytime soon, if you could send that out to us, well in advance, sure, as soon as you get it, instead of.
Yeah, I won't wait for a meeting then. As soon as it's together and prepared, we'll just ship it out, either email it to you, or we'll send out a packet with a hard copy for all the commissioners.
Yeah, I'm assuming it's not going to be a lengthy document. Is that fair to say?
It really, you know how attorneys are. They're paid by the word, so it may be. No, I'm teasing. Sorry. It depends. I can't, it might be 3 pages, it might be 20 pages. I really don't know. It really depends on the number of statutes and or any case law that he needs to cite that he wants to attach to his responses. So it could be several pages, but.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that if we get that in late November, early December, and then we don't meet again until January, it might be a good idea to send it when it comes in and then include it in our packet again.
Absolutely.
Assuming it's not 75 pages or something like that. I saw a hand raising to my right.
Yeah, quick question. I was under the impression or thought that he had some of those questions already answered since Parkway is well underway and they had the clearing of it this past weekend, that he already addressed a lot of those questions we had with the township board.
None of which was provided to me.
Okay. Because I guess the same questions that we'd had with our road ends should have already been addressed, because Parkway is already being cleaned out, has been cleaned out. Those aren't aware of the end of Parkway and East River. This past weekend, they had the volunteer cleanup day, and would have imagined a lot of those things around liability and access and, okay,
Nothing I'm aware of.
all right.
Okay, well, we look forward to that. Next up on the list of items I want to discuss, we have previously prepared a list of zoning ordinances that we wanted to revisit, whether new or amended, and we had originally created a extremely long list, and we decided to take it in bite-sized chunks, and recently completed one set of those revisions and are looking at the next. We've got about 12 more, if I remember correctly, that are being considered. But before we proceeded, at our last meeting, we had a discussion about our budget and the cost to complete, since we do rely on your effort fairly heavily in that process to help guide us in those amendments. So we asked you to look at our budget, the line items in our budget that we have control over, and discuss the costs that would be associated with bringing these to completion. So if you could update us on those items, we'd appreciate it.
Absolutely. There was I had the township manager and I worked with the finance director to prepare a budget summary. Unfortunately, we weren't able to narrow it down, so what you received in your packets was the full community development line item by line item. I asked Lori to go ahead and just highlight the key sections so you don't have to focus on all the other things such as vision and dental insurance. Although I'm sure you are considerate of that, knowing that Lori's eyes will be taken care of. Obviously, it's not really our main concern at the meeting here. No offense, Lori. What I wanted to show you was that of the 4 primary accounts that relate to Planning Commission and/or my involvement with the township, what you can see on those 4 highlighted line items is that we are on target on one item, and we are well under budget on the other 3 items. One of those in particular is the budget line item for zoning ordinance amendments. And you can see that is one situation where we are well under budget. There's a substantial amount left, far more than we need to undertake the next round of amendments. If you look down, that's item 817.100, consultation zoning ordinance. You can see we've only spent year to date to get through the last set. We've only spent 35% of our budget, and year to date we're at 60%. So we're, I don't want to say well behind in a bad way, we're well ahead of schedule in a good way. We have more than enough, and unless we find a substantial number of additional items we want to address in the ordinance, there's no way on earth we're going to spend what's been budgeted. We'll come in well under that. So even with the next round of amendments. So I guess my hope was that this would show you that financially, from a planning and zoning standpoint, the department is in very good shape for the fiscal year.
Okay.
I'd like to ask
Yes.
Jay,
Yes, ma'am.
do we have garages and accessory buildings in your 12? Have anything to do with those?
Brian, do you recall where those fall in the hit rate?
Yeah, there are some proposed amendments to Section 1911 is what Ann's referring to. And I think what you're getting at is there have been some questions and concerns raised by the Zoning Board of Appeals as it relates to application of that section. A number of their variance requests have been related to accessory buildings. You may recall, a few years back, really that was the impetus for us to develop this new R1F district to better address Hickory Island because it's such a unique situation. And at the time, it accounted for about 80% of our variance requests. So we've addressed that, but it still seems that accessory buildings in general, not just on Hickory Island, in general, are generating most of our variance requests. So I believe it was really more of a generalized thing to look at it and make sure that what we have is appropriate and is working. And it may just be that that there are these issues out there and that variances need to be sought, or maybe a case where there's something we can do to maybe improve that situation while not being harmful to surrounding property owners.
Okay. Anybody have any questions on this matter for Brian or anybody else?
I have more of a general comment. I know that, I'm more of a newer member to the commission, and you guys have been doing the zoning ordinance, revisiting that. But I was wondering, when were we planning on revisiting the master plan? I know that our community master plan is, getting up there in age. I believe it's around at least 10 years old, if not more. And, that's what's supposed to actually drive the zoning ordinance, as well as probably open space planning and recreation planning and all sorts of other planning for the island. And so I was just wondering if that had been thought about.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, it has, Brian, just so you know. The Commission's well aware of the statutory requirement to review every 5 years, and I believe it was only a year or two ago that the Commission reaffirmed the status of the current master plan. So at least as of today, the Commission and the Township have deemed the plan current and up to date. It's always, that's something that can change year to year, if not month to month. So if and when the Planning Commission and Township Board decide that they'd like to open up the plan for update or amendment or total rewrite, whatever the scenario, obviously then we'll be in a position to do that. But that's something that we'll want to make sure is thought about and planned ahead of time, so that community development budgets accordingly.
What is the date of our last master plan? I seem to recall it was about 9 years ago.
The date of the plan itself is one thing, but as I mentioned, the Commission by resolution only a year or two ago reaffirmed its status as current. I can get you the original date. Original date is 02, fall of 02. So, this plan's been in effect for 9 years. It was something that we looked into at the 5-year mark. It was something we looked into again only a year or two ago. So, at the time, the township, didn't demonstrate a desire to open it up for any amendment or update at that time. So, if that's something the Commission wants to consider, obviously you're always, it's always within your purview, but it's unfortunate Eric's not here tonight to participate in this part, but, it's something that the board would obviously need to participate in as well.
Yeah, and really the whole community.
Yes.
I was involved in it the last time, and it was really a great process to go through. It's a lot of work for obviously for the Planning Commission, for the Township Board, for our planning staff, for every commission in the township. I mean, it's a big undertaking, but it really, if you put the time and effort in, it really you learn a lot about what you're really trying to accomplish at these things, and it helps to focus a lot of the discussions that we have here. And I think we would probably find if we did that, we probably would change at least the tone of a number of things that we did 9 years ago. But as Brian said, I think it was a year or two ago, we reaffirmed that nothing significantly had changed, and frankly, we weren't prepared to undertake the time, effort, and expense associated with it at that point. I mean, if there was something significant, I think we may have decided differently. On the point of the budget, I think one of the things that's not clear from what we've been provided is is when the year end is. So this indicates that for 3 of the line items that are highlighted, where around 30 or 35% of the budget is spent, how much of the year has gone by, of the fiscal year has gone by?
The township's fiscal year is April 1, so in essence, we are at 60% of the year, so to speak. So anything that is at 60% or under is at budget or under budget. That's why I referenced, so the 29%, the 35%, the 31% are well under budget at this point in time, given where we are in the year cycle.
Okay. One of the things that I think is important to point out is that we, like everybody else in the township, would love to find ways to spend less of the money than is budgeted, because there are other needs that we could find for that money. And so we don't want to be perceived, nor certainly do we want to take the approach that we're just going to spend every dollar that's allocated to us. On the other hand, I think it's important to note that there is a cost savings that comes out of these things, in addition to the obvious protection of the community and the standards. And that is, as Ann was referencing, there are certain items that come up repeatedly for variance, and that's really a point of focus for us, is that if we hit the ones that have many variances, frequent variance requests, we reduce planning time that's associated with working up those requests. So there's, in addition to just doing our job of protecting the standards of the community, we also kind of save some money by spending some money in these cases. So whether it's one for one, I don't know, but it's worth noting that there is a cost savings that's associated with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, just to get kind of back to your initial point there of, it's not our intent, obviously, to end up the year at 100%. Obviously, we'd like to be under that, and I believe that we most certainly will be. As I noted in my presentation the last go-around we went through this, it's my intent to utilize whatever other sources or line items I can. And I mentioned the obvious one being the retainer. Every month, there's a retainer that we have per contract with the township, and in certain months it's intended to cover costs of preparing and attending a planning commission meeting. Obviously, we're not meeting every month, so when there is no planning commission meeting, that retainer fee covers some other item, whether it's a ZBA meeting, whether it's a board meeting, whether it's some other function that I'm asked to do by staff or by the township manager. So, what my goal is to use as much of that retainer, whatever's available on those non-meeting months, to use that retainer towards the ordinance updates. So that money's going to be spent one way or another. We may as well offset our ordinance budget to the extent possible. The other alternative is, when possible, we're budgeted for office hours every month. I come down once a month, I meet with applicants, I work with staff, we review projects. If there happens to be a month I'm down and we're not fully booked with meetings or with project reviews, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 hours of that day that could go towards ordinance amendments as well. And again, that's money that's budgeted. It's going to be spent. It's going to be used because it's been earmarked for a specific purpose. But the idea being that it will allow us to be even more efficient with our ordinance amendments in terms of our budget.
So to put it another way, the certain things like the retainer and the one township day a month, we're going to pay that whether you're here doing anything or not. But what you're doing is you're taking some of those funds that we're going to pay one way or another and using it for activities that actually are happening.
Yes. Yeah. And as I noted last time, we've never had a month in my 8 years working with you that we've not used that retainer. Sure. It's never been a retainer that you've simply paid with no work in receipt. I just want to make sure that's clear. There's always work behind it.
We appreciate that, and we can see the benefit of it. Thanks. So the question then on the table is, the purpose of that whole discussion wasn't just to review our budget, it was to help us determine whether or not we wanted to proceed with some activities to rewrite some of our ordinances. And so that's the question on the table. Does anybody want to discuss whether we're going to move forward or not, or do I hear a motion?
Who's on the committee now?
That's a good question. I am. Jim is.
I am.
And you're on?
Is that it? We have 2?
Yeah, we lost our third member resigned last year, I think.
Right.
I'll join if you need some help.
Well, we appreciate that. That doesn't cause us a quorum problem, does it?
No, we're fine. 3 is fine. 4
Looks like our
creates a
timer ran
problem.
out on our
Because right now we're only at. Are we, Lori? Are we? I'm sorry to digress. Are we? We're not at full.
No, we're missing 2.
We're still too short. So we're operating with 7. We're potentially a 9-member commission.
So a subcommittee of 3 is okay?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so anything else? Comments? Questions? Motion?
I'll make a motion to proceed with the last 12 ordinance changes per the plan that Brian laid out, the steps and the email that was included in the minutes, and per the fact that the funds are allocated in the budget.
Is that a motion?
Yes, what?
I'll second.
We have a motion from John and a second from Ann. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, we'll move forward. And that gets us on to the next meeting date. As I previewed already, we don't have anything that we are currently working that is approaching anything like urgency. And typically, if things aren't busy, we take off December because of holidays. Although we certainly would reconsider that if we had pressing matters. So we'd be off for the holidays. We get into January, and we hit the first Monday is
The second?
is the 2nd, and that's right after. I don't think we want to be here on January 2nd.
No, we don't want to come on a second.
And then the 16th, I believe, is Martin Luther King Day. And lucky us, there's a 5th Monday in January. So does January 30th sound reasonable for everybody?
Yes.
Yes. All right. Well, we'll target January 30th. It's not likely that anybody's going to be doing any construction in December and January anyway, so we'll hit the ground running for all the spring construction. And that's all I have for the good of the cause. Anybody else? I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Somebody else second it. I'll second it if they have it.
And let's vote with our feet.